For 3,000 years, one family ruled the ancient world by marrying their own brothers and sisters, and it wasn't fiction. It was Egypt. The Ptolemies did it for 14 generations, and when George R.R. Martin sat down to build the most powerful dynasty in fantasy history, he didn't invent that idea. He borrowed it from us, from real royal bloodlines that believed their blood was too precious to mix with anyone else's. So when you watch the Targaryens marry brother to sister generation after generation and call it the blood of the dragon, you're not just watching a TV show. You're watching a pattern that real human civilizations repeated over and over for the exact same reason. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why they thought it was worth the risk and exactly what it cost them. Think about your own family for a second. Somewhere down the line, you've probably got a great-great-grandparent. You know almost nothing about a name on a certificate, maybe a photo that's faded past recognition. Most of us lose our family history within 4 or 5 generations. The Targaryens didn't just remember theirs, they obsessed over it, charted it, protected it like a weapon. Because to them, blood wasn't just heritage, it was power. Literal, magical, world-altering power. And that single belief that their bloodline was a resource worth any sacrifice to protect is the thread that explains almost everything strange, brilliant, and horrifying this family ever did. To understand the Targaryens, you have to go back long before Westeros, long before dragons crossed the narrow sea to a peninsula on the eastern continent called Valyria. Picture a civilization built the way Rome liked to imagine itself. 40 ruling families, the freehold, sharing power over an empire that stretched further than any other in the known world. And at the center of that empire's power wasn't gold or grain, it was dragons. The Valyrians didn't just find dragons, they learned to breed them, bond with them, and pass that bond down through bloodlines. Not every Valyrian could ride a dragon, only certain families could. And here's the detail most people miss. The Valyrians believed rightly or wrongly that the ability to control a dragon wasn't a skill, it was inherited. Genetic, something in the blood, which meant if you wanted to keep that power in your family and nobody else's, there was only one guaranteed way to do it. Keep the bloodline closed. One decision made centuries before a single Targaryen ever set foot in Westeros would end up defining this family for 400 years afterward. Then, in a single night, it all ended. Volcanic eruptions tore the Valyrian Peninsula apart in an event the histories call the Doom Cities swallowed. Dragons burned in their own skies, an empire that had stood for 5,000 years gone before dawn. Every one of the 40 great families was wiped out. Everyone except one. House Targaryen had left Valyria 12 years earlier, relocated to a rocky outpost called Dragonstone, for reasons the in-universe histories can't fully agree on. Some accounts call it foresight, some call it luck, but here's the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. The family matriarch who insisted on that move, Daenerys Targaryen, was said to have dreamed of the doom before it happened. Whether you read that as prophecy or as smart political timing, dressed up as prophecy afterward, the result is the same one bloodline survived the end of an empire, and every other dragon-riding family on Earth was gone. Which meant House Targaryen wasn't just rich anymore. They were, quite suddenly, the only people left alive who carried whatever it was that let a human sit on a dragon's back without being burned alive. And that made their blood the single most valuable substance in the known world. This is the part most people watch and just accept without asking why. Aegon the Conqueror married both of his sisters. His descendants kept doing it, generation after generation, almost without exception for nearly 200 years. And if your instinct is to say, that's just fantasy weirdness, I want to push back on that because it isn't. It's a direct echo of something real royal families across multiple continents actually practiced, and the logic behind it is more calculated than most people realize. Here's the real-world parallel. The Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt, the same family that produced Cleopatra, ruled for nearly 300 years. And sibling marriage was standard practice almost the entire time. Cleopatra herself was the product of generations of it. Why? Because in a culture that already believed its pharaohs were living gods, marrying outside the family diluted that divinity. It let a rival family's blood and a rival family's political claim into the throne. Keeping marriage inside the bloodline wasn't seen as strange. It was seen as the only way to keep the throne, and the power that came with it entirely their own. The Targaryens made almost the exact same calculation, except their version of divine blood was a literal testable ability dragon riding. If you married a Targaryen to an outsider, you risked producing a child who couldn't bond with a dragon at all. Do that a few generations in a row, and your dynasty's entire military advantage, the thing that let 3 dragons conquer 7 kingdoms in the first place, quietly evaporates. So from their perspective, keeping the bloodline closed wasn't superstition. It was a security policy, a way of protecting the one asset that made them unstoppable. But, and this is where it gets darker, there's a second reason, one the show doesn't spell out nearly as clearly as the histories do. A Targaryen with no outside blood had no outside family. No father-in-law scheming for a larger dowry, no brother-in-law expecting a castle, no wife's house plotting to place its own bloodline closer to the throne. Marrying within the family didn't just protect the dragons, it starved every other noble house in Westeros of a foothold inside the royal bedroom. It was, in its own brutal way, one of the most effective anti-coup strategies in the entire history of the Seven Kingdoms. If keeping the bloodline pure was such a good strategy, why did nearly every real dynasty that tried it eventually abandon it? The answer has a name historians still study today: the Habsburgs. For nearly 200 years, the royal houses of Spain and Austria intermarried so consistently cousins, uncles, nieces, that by the time you reach King Charles II of Spain in the late 1600s, his own family tree had essentially folded in on itself. Geneticists who studied his ancestry generations later calculated that his level of inbreeding was close to what you'd expect from a child of siblings, even though his parents were uncle and niece. He couldn't chew his own food properly, he was infertile. He died at 38 with no heir, and his death triggered a war that reshaped the map of Europe. That's not a fantasy plot twist. That's recorded medical and genealogical history. And the Targaryens, whether the histories admit it outright or not, ran the exact same experiment. For every powerful dragon-riding king the family produced, there's a cousin, a nephew, or a niece in the background dealing with something quieter: instability, illness, a temperament the court diplomatically called unwell. The in-universe records even have a phrase for it. Some Targaryens are remembered as the Mad Ones, almost as often as others are remembered as the Great Ones, sometimes in the very same generation. That's not coincidence. That's the same biological math that broke the Spanish throne, playing out in a fictional family that was making the identical bet the Habsburgs made for the identical reason. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because the blood of the dragon isn't just royal branding inside the story's own logic. It functions almost like a biological key fitting a biological lock. Dragons in this world aren't tamed the way you'd tame a horse. They're bonded, and the histories are full of cautionary tales about outsiders who tried to mount a dragon that wasn't theirs and were burned alive for the attempt. Being born a Targaryen didn't guarantee you could ride one, but not being born a Targaryen almost guaranteed you couldn't. That distinction matters because it's exactly the kind of ambiguity real royal dynasties love to lean into. Nobody could prove in the moment whether a prince's dragon-riding talent came from pure blood or simply from being raised around dragons since infancy, drilled in the bond from the time he could walk. The uncertainty was, in a strange way, useful. It let the family claim their power was inherited and inevitable, a birthright no rival house could ever compete for, while also quietly training every heir from childhood to make sure the theory kept looking true. It's propaganda and biology working the same angle at the same time, and honestly, the real world's royal dynasties did exactly the same thing with the idea of the divine right of kings. For nearly 100 years, the Targaryen strategy worked almost exactly as designed. Then it collapsed not because of an outside invasion, not because a rival house finally broke through, but because of a succession dispute inside the family itself. Two branches of the same bloodline, each with a claim exactly as strong as the others, went to war, and for the first time in history, dragon was set against dragon. The in-universe records call it the Dance of the Dragons. And by the time it ended, most of the dragons that had made the family unstoppable for 150 years were dead, killed by each other. Sit with that for a second, because it's the darkest irony in the whole story. Every safeguard the Targaryens built the closed bloodline, the intermarriage, The isolation from outside families existed to protect a monopoly on power from external threats. Nobody built a safeguard against the succession crisis because the strategy assumed loyalty inside the family was guaranteed. It wasn't, and when it broke catastrophically, because a family that concentrates all of its power into one bloodline has no fallback plan for when that bloodline turns on itself. That's the real lesson buried under all the dragons and the incest and the palace intrigue. Exactly the same strategy that made House Targaryen the most powerful family in the known world was, structurally, the exact same strategy that eventually tore it apart. By the time the story most audiences know best begins, generations later the dragons are gone, the family has been driven from power once, restored once, and the pure blood that wants to find them has been diluted by exile, war, and necessity. And yet the belief never fully dies. It resurfaces in the next generation, and the one after that in a girl raised in exile who's told her whole life that dragons will answer to her blood alone, and in a boy raised as someone else's son who turns out to carry that same blood without ever knowing it. The strategy that built the family and the strategy that nearly destroyed it both get one more test centuries after Aegon first made the bet that pure blood was worth any cost. So the real question isn't whether the Targaryens were right to believe their blood was special. History shows us plenty of real dynasties that believed the exact same thing and paid the exact same price. The real question is this: was there ever a version of this family that could have kept the power without paying for it in madness, civil war, and burned bloodlines? Because there's one branch of this family tree we haven't talked about yet, the one that broke every rule the others followed, married outside the bloodline, and ended up arguably more stable for it. If House Targaryen's whole philosophy was keep the blood pure at any cost, what happened to the one line that didn't? That's next,